Hi, this is Jonathan Smith on my Bam Bam Rubble case study presentation. So a little bit of information about Bam Bam. He's 6.5 years old. He's going to receive occupational therapy 3 times a week in an outpatient facility. And his initial diagnosis was delayed motor development, and he was diagnosed 2 months later with a lack of motor control or lack of coordination. And this was due to a widespread low muscle tone in his shoulder girdle and in his trunk. He was also tested with the Peabody Development Motor Scale, and he tested low in all areas. Um, Oops, I didn't mean to do that. He tested low in all areas, and some of those areas were like locomotion, object manipulation, and grasping. And at best, he tested at a 3-year-old level, where he's 6.5. So some of his problems that he's having is shoulder girdle weakness. And so he's having problems due to that weakness. He's having issues with proximal stabilization. So he has issues holding his arm steady at the shoulder. And because he has issues holding his arm steady, he has problems with motor coordination. He has difficulty accurately moving his arms where he needs to move them. He has difficulty crossing the midline and doing tasks that cross the midline. And if he has hard time controlling his upper body or close to his body, his arms close to his body, he's going to have a hard time working his hands. And so he has poor fine motor control as well due to that. So that's going to make it hard for him to write with his crossing midline or color or things like that. It's also going to make it hard for him to like catch balls or dress himself by himself. Along with his shoulder girdle weakness, he also has some trunk weakness, which is going to affect his balance and his locomotion. So he has a hard time standing upright. Um, Without some sort of support. He also has a hard time walking in a straight line for like heel toes with more than 6 steps. He also has a hard time, like he can't skip at all. And at this age, he should be able to skip well. So his balance has thrown off his ability to get around well. And if he has a hard time getting around, then he's going to have a hard time socializing with his peers. Because if they're out there doing all like they're out there playing and doing all these fun activities and doing all this other stuff that kids typically his age do, he might miss out on those things because he can't keep up. And if he can't keep up, then he's going to have a hard time making friends. And if he can't make friends, then it's going to cause him some emotional strife and later on maybe a little bit of psychosocial problems. And then on top of that, he also has a gross grasp. So instead of being able to like individualize his fingers and use them semi-independently of one another, which at this point he should be able to do, he should have a pretty good um, tripod grasp, you know. He doesn't. At this point, he uses his whole hand to pick things up, or he uses all of his fingers as one unit rather than uh, differentiating into just um, his pointer finger and his thumb, doing little things like that. So some of the milestones that he should be at right here at a typical 6.5-year-old, what they would be meeting for gross motor, they should be able to skip well at this point. So that skipping goal that he has that we'll talk about in a minute should be well met. He should be able to ride a bike. He should be able to catch balls with both of his hands, you know. He should be able to kick with some accuracy and he should be able to run with some endurance. And some of his fine motor milestones at this point, he should be able to manipulate objects in his fingertips without dropping them. So more than just even picking them up, more than just, you know, holding it. He should be able to manipulate them and do things with them rather without them falling to the floor. He should also be able to dress himself completely independently. That is pants, that is shirt, that is coat, that is socks. At 5 years old, he should be right around 5 is when you typically are able to tie your shoe by yourself. So he should be able to dress himself completely on his own. Some of his cognitive milestones that he should be meeting at this point, um, this is right around 6 is when cause and effect thinking begins, or maybe just a little bit before 6. And that's when you understand that if I do this, this will be the outcome. And then there's also this development of reciprocal speech. So it's actual like conversational speech rather than just responding to someone. It's having this back and forth type speech. On top of that, that's when they begin to understand opposites like hot and cold, and big and small, and hard and soft. And that's when they start to understand the why question. That's when they get really big into why, why, why. Then we look at our sensory milestones, and around this age is when you start having a sense of time. So understanding like this time is longer than that time. They should be able to differentiate between or understand the ideas around like 1 second, a minute, an hour. Understand that there are different lengths of time and that they will come at different times. This is also when they're able to form letters correctly. So they should, at 6.5, they should be able to form letters and you be able to identify them pretty well. They should also be able to write simple sentences. Nothing super crazy complex, but simple sentences should be good. This is also when they're able to categorize things as like books and food and toys and put them in their own little boxes. So some of our goals that we have for him, we have some locomotion goals. So those are things like he's not able to skip at all, so one of his goals is to be able to skip fluently. He's also not able to crawl effectively. He has difficulty crawling, so one of our goals for that is to be able to do that well and with proper reciprocal motion patterns. He also has issues walking, and we'll get into that with balance also. But he has issues walking heel to toe with more than 6 steps. And just generally, he has a harder time getting around than most other kids. And he also has several self-care goals. Some of those are, well, primarily those are his dressing goals. So he, at this point, is unable to button his shirt or a jacket without a little bit of assistance. And our goal is to get him where he's independent, being able to do that by himself, fully by himself. He has another goal for dressing his bottom half, his legs, buttoning his pants independently. Or not independently, but with minimal assistance. And as of right now, he needs a lot of help to get his pants and stuff buttoned up. He also has some school activity goals, things like coloring a picture and covering 50% of the image, whereas right now he's only able to he's not able to do that at all. He misses, he draws outside the lines. He has no concept of boundaries at this point. He also has another goal of being able to copy things up close. So instead of copying things way out in the distance like what they would be on the board or up on the wall, like a poster up on the wall, he has a really hard time doing that to the point that it's not even conducive to his classroom activities. Like he's not able to do it successfully at all. So one of our goals is to get him to be able to do that with up close with a little bit of extra time. Another one of his goals, we talked about his balance goals in locomotion, and so another one of his social goals is he has a goal to be able to make spontaneous eye contact appropriately. Right now, he doesn't make spontaneous eye contact with the therapist at all. So one of our goals is to get him to where he's able to make that eye contact in appropriate situations. And then some of the goals that I thought of outside of what was on his evaluation was I really want to work with his grasp because I think it's really important to work on his grasp to get that tripod grasp going, working really hard to try to get that. And then another goal is to have him be able to catch a ball with both of his hands up against his body because that has a lot to do with crossing this by like bilateral coordination, stabilization of the shoulder, and all sorts of stuff that are really good that he has a lot of trouble with. So in our first session, what we're going to do is we're going to have him jump on a trampoline, one of those little kid trampolines that has the stabilization bar. And while he's jumping, we're going to have him reach for balls or bean bags or whatever, just little objects that the therapist is holding at different places. So it could be pulling like up here or down here or across. And while he's holding on with one hand, to that stabilization bar because he does have issues with balance. And then once he reaches for the ball and once he grabs it, he's going to stop bouncing and then he's going to turn and throw it into a box that's differing distances away from the trampoline. So what this is going to work on, it's going to work on his balance 100% because it's super important that we work on his balance so that he can get around effectively. It's also going to work on his motor coordination of his upper body, being able to throw things and reach for things at differing distances and heights and that type of thing. It's also going to help him cross midline because the therapist can hold things across his midline, whereas right now he's having a really hard time doing that. So we can help him with that, being able to do that easily. If that is too hard for him, one thing that you can do is have him sit on an exercise ball and bounce on an exercise ball and do the same thing. That way it's a little bit more stable and a little bit more controlled. But if it's too easy, once he gets really good at it, he could even go up a little bit further and turn around and not hold on to the support bar and get to where he's bouncing without the support of the support bar and he's able to do it by himself. Um, and then our next activity that we can do after we do that, because we want to get on, we want to work. The way that I've kind of set this up with all of mine is I like the idea of starting off with a gross motor activity where you get a lot of energy going and you get excited and ready to work, and you get a little bit of it burn out. I'd read I read an article that unfortunately I could not find again. Otherwise, I would have linked it in here. But it was talking about how vestibular input is really good before doing motor activities. It helps with them learning and stuff. So I really like the idea of doing these high activity, fun, gross motor activities at the beginning. So after the trampoline, what we're going to do is we're going to move into a coloring sheet, and we're going to use those like velvet coloring sheets that have the raised velvet lining, the borders. And so what we're going to do is we're going to start with like large patterns that aren't very complicated, and then work into smaller patterns that are a little bit more complicated. And the rationale behind this is it works on fine motor skills and it works on his coloring goal that he has specifically for coloring, and that raised edge will give him that tactile input to know where the border is and where to stay in, and like how to stay in the line. Um, And then so if this is too difficult for him, what you can always do is to use less complicated pictures with larger designs, and then use utensils like his writing utensils, like big fat markers, or use pencil grips or that type of thing to make it easier for him to hold on to it so he has a little bit more stabilization when he's coloring. If it's too easy, then use more complicated designs, use more intricate pictures, or move down instead of using a marker, use a colored pencil or one of those skinny markers. That would make it a whole lot harder to challenge him even more. And then after we get done with the coloring sheet, we're going to get back up and we're going to do an egg balancing um, game where you put an egg, or not, we're not going to use an actual egg, but you put a ball or some sort of little object, some round object on the end of a spoon, and go from one end of the room to the other. This is going to help with his balance because he has to balance the egg on the thing, and this is also going to work on his hand placement for his holding the scissors because that's the same type grip that you have when you're holding scissors, is that type of thing. One thing that you can do to even work on that even further is to use a weighted bag, like a weighted bean bag, which will pull it down even further to strengthen his hands to able to hold that up. On top of that, if it's a little bit hard, then we could use like a plate, like a plastic plate, and hold that so it's bigger, and then use a light ball, like a ping pong ball or something. That'll make it a whole lot easier on him. And if it's too hard, then if it's too easy, then use you can use a smaller spoon and a heavier bag. And then our last thing that we're going to do for this session is work with Legos. And we're going to use the big interconnecting Legos to stack them up because that works on your motor coordination, and it's going to work on um, uh, that the motor coordination to like stack them on one another. And it's also going to help with that grip strength. And then I'm going to pause here.